so few current writers and thinkers on the right really focus on philosophy today in a thoughtful and serious way. And you know, what some people call today, you hear a lot of reference to Ronald Reagan, and even people talk about kind of National Review conservatism, and as of late you hear this mention of full spectrum conservatism. But you know, so little of that discussion is really focused on philosophy. It's focused instead on public policy and on politics. We hear a lot. I was talking to Jonah a few minutes ago about the three-legged stool, which is really a political construction having to do with coalitions, voting coalitions, not a coherent philosophy. And as I quoted last night from Bill Buckley, conservatism is about realism. And Jonah mentions this in his foreword. He says, conservatism is a form of realism. It's grounded in transcendental as well as immanent truths. And it understands that man is imperfect. And it's an anti-utopian way of looking at the world. What we're going to do this morning is Jonah's going to speak for about 15 or 20 minutes, then we'll turn things over to Lee Edwards and Doug Bandow, who will each speak for about 5 minutes, and then I'll ask them a couple of questions, and then we'll have lots of time for you each to interact and ask questions as well. We had a light breakfast from 7 to 9, and in about an hour, you've got some food in case you're still hungry on the table, so feel free to enjoy the fruit and muffins. But at 11, we're actually going to have a proper brunch brought in, and so save some room for that, and you can ask the questions while we're eating. And then I'm told the speakers have a little time to get some food afterwards, too. So that's the plan, so you all know what we're anticipating. I'll go ahead and introduce each of the speakers now and get that out of the way. So Jonah, as most of you know, is a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and senior editor at National Review magazine. He's a best-selling author. His nationally syndicated column appears regularly in over 100 newspapers across the United States. He's a weekly columnist for the Los Angeles Times, a member of the board of contributors to USA Today, a Fox News contributor, and a regular member of the Fox News All-Stars on Special Report with Bret Baier. He was a founding editor of National Review Online. The Atlantic magazine identified him as one of the top 50 commentators in America. Among his awards, in 2011, he was named the Robert J. Novak Journalist of the Year at the CPAC conference. He's written on politics, media, and culture for a wide variety of leading publications and has appeared on numerous television and radio programs. He's the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Tyranny of Cliches and Liberal Fascism. Doug Bandow is one of ISI's favorite libertarians. He's a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, and he specializes in foreign policy and civil liberties. He worked as a special assistant to President Ronald Reagan and editor of the political magazine Inquiry. He writes regularly for leading publications such as Fortune magazine, National Interest, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Times. He speaks frequently at academic conferences, on college campuses, on behalf of ISI and other organizations, and to business groups. He's been a regular commentator on ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC, and he holds a JD from Stanford University. Lee Edwards, we refer to as Mr. ISI. In fact, he wrote the book, literally, on ISI, Educating for Liberty. We mentioned that ISI was founded in 1953 by Frank Chodorov, who was a libertarian, as Lee pointed out, and Doug will kind of represent a little bit that strain of the ISI philosophy, and Lee will represent the strain that was then later picked up by Vic Milioni and Russell Kirk and others. And in fact, as Lee mentioned, we changed the name from the Intercollegiate Society of Individualists, which Doug thought was a perfectly good name, to the Intercollegiate Society to the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. Lee is the Distinguished Fellow in Conservative Thought at the Heritage Foundation. He's a leading historian of American conservatism and is the author of 25 books. Lee also is an adjunct professor of politics at the Catholic University of America and chairman of a foundation that dedicated the Victims of Communism Memorial in Washington, D.C., and is raising tens of millions of dollars to have a Victims of Communism museum in Washington, D.C. His books include biographies of Ronald Reagan, Barry Goldwater, William F. Buckley Jr., and Ed Meese, as well as histories of the Heritage Foundation and the American Conservative Movement. His works have been translated into Chinese, Japanese, French, Hungarian, and Swedish. His next book, written with his daughter, Elizabeth Edwards Spaulding, is A Brief History of the Cold War, to be published by Regnery. Is it published yet? It's the spring of 2016. Is it out? It's come out. So I encourage that book to all of you. And another thing about Lee is we call him at ISI a double dipper because both his daughter, Elizabeth, who is his co-author, and his son-in-law, Matt Spaulding, who many of you know, were both ISI graduate fellows, Weaver fellows. So without further ado, let's bring up Jonah and welcome him.
It is absolutely fantastic to be here. I've already learned something. I had no idea that Matt Spaulding was Lee Edwards' son-in-law, and as a friend of Matt Spaulding, it opened whole new vistas into understanding him. And I want to really thank you guys for being so good to me, so good to the National Review. ISI they're essentially close cousins, and in sort of the tribal world of politics, your cousin clans always are willing to take up their shields and swords and go into battle with you, and ISI has always been there for us, and we've always been there for them, and delighted to still be here. I want to make one quick point before we get started. I know I have the most Jewish-sounding name this side of Shlomo Abramowitz, but just for the record, I'm a much worse Jew than Dennis Prager, and I have absolutely, speaking of absolute vodka corrupting absolutely, I have no problem speaking Friday nights. I have a bit more of a problem with Saturday mornings, and this one is no exception, so take that for what it is. So I don't have a lot of time up here, and I want Chris just to sort of give me the 1-minute signal, and I'll stop someplace mid-sentence, sort of like Joe Biden when he talks about anything. So I'm supposed to be talking about what is conservatism, and I would say, hey, look, just read the foreword of my book, but I met this very nice guy at the cocktail party last night who came up to me, and the first thing he said is, I want to ask you a question. What is conservatism? Because I've been trying to read that essay you wrote for 4 days, and I can't get through it. And I was like, which is not exactly what every writer wants to hear. So I guess I'll try to give it another whack, okay? It's kind of a funny thing. Conservatism is arguably the only political philosophy that actually has no ideological content. Now that might sound weird at some place like this, but it's actually true. Samuel Huntington, in a famous essay written in the 1950s called Conservatism as an Ideology, pointed this out, that a conservative in America means something very different than a conservative in, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, right? What does a conservative in Saudi Arabia want to conserve? Very different stuff than the stuff that we want to conserve in this room. This is one of the reasons why I used to drive my dad, who was a passionate anti-communist, batty whenever they would talk about on the news how the bad guy, how the people in the ardent Marxists in the Soviet Union, the real orthodox guys, were the conservatives. And it's one of these things that sort of lends to this tendency in a lot of ways that liberals talk about stuff, that the conservatives are just the bad guys everywhere, right? It's like sort of how Barack Obama talks about how the hardliners in Iran have the same views as the hardliners in America, which is profoundly stupid and fairly slanderous, but it's this one of these things that's very frustrating. And so this raises the question, what do conservatives in America want to conserve, right? Which is very different, again, if you're a conservative in France, certainly if you're a conservative in France or Portugal, you may want to conserve the monarchy, the role of, the rule of throne and church over society. These are very different things from what people in America want to conserve. And it's funny, if you listen to Dennis Prager last night, and I'm a big fan of Dennis's, and and we talked about how essentially all good stuff comes from Western civilization. Now, I think that even Dennis would concede that this is a bit of an oversimplification. I mean, we did get algebra from, you know, the Arab world, and I can come up with a few other things. But as a general proposition, Western civilization is the first priority that conservatives want to conserve. So is traditional morality. So is the tradition of ordered liberty. And most important and relevant for this group and for this talk is that American conservatives want to conserve the ideals and principles enshrined in the American founding, the American Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. And this is one of the reasons why Friedrich Hayek, praise be upon him, said that that America was the only country in the world where you could call yourself a conservative and still be a defender and lover of liberty. Because what we are trying to conserve in America was very different than the European conservatives that he was contending with in most of his debates. What we wanted to conserve in America was a radical, classical, liberal revolution that said, in essence, that our rights come from God, not from government, that the fruits of our labors belong to us, that we are citizens, not subjects, the government works for us, we don't work for it, that we are, as John Locke would put it, captains of ourselves, that the individual is sovereign. These are the principles that come out of the American Declaration, these are the principles that come out of the American founding, and these are the principles that American conservatives, broadly understood, at least in the political sphere, want to conserve and protect. And I think, though, that this is what gets kind of weird about conservatism, is that because we are not actually a coherent ism, like so many other isms, right? A socialist in France is essentially the same thing as a socialist in Belgium, as in, you know, or as maybe even from Vermont, right? But they all basically, it is a coherent ideology that is the same everywhere. If you're a true libertarian, you can be a libertarian in France, and it doesn't mean anything really different than being a libertarian in America or being a libertarian in Russia. But if you're a conservative, it's something else. And one of the things that I think really distinguishes psychologically, philosophically, conservatism from other political philosophies is that conservatives, broadly speaking, are comfortable with contradiction. And what I mean by this, well, I mean a lot of things by this, but one of the things I mean by this is that deep in the realism that Chris was talking about, deep in the realism of conservatism is this. It's a metaphysical, it's a theological, and it's an economic and practical bedrock faith in principle. That we understand that life is about trade-offs, right? We understand that to have one good thing might mean that it has to come at the expense of another good thing. This is the essence of economics, right? The question is never, making the ideal, making the choice between the good and the perfect. Because we understand, whether it's from a Christian perspective or a Jewish perspective or just a practical sort of Tom Sowell-like economic perspective, that there is no perfection in this world. That everything is about trade-offs. Everything is about compromises. And that's true in our lives. We have a finite amount of time in this world. We have a finite amount of things that we can do with our time. And conservatives, at a very philosophical and fundamental level, understand this. And if you look at almost all of the other radical philosophies, whatever names you want to put on, fascism, communism, socialism, Marxism, thisism, thatism, it doesn't really matter. All of the sort of utopian political philosophies, they all basically boil down to the same sort of religious perspective that says we can create a heaven on earth here. That there's a unity of good things, that we don't have to make choices. If you listen to Bill Clinton or Barack Obama talk about things, they always like to frame things in these false choices, where they say, I refuse to believe that we live in a country where we have to sacrifice economic growth for protecting the environment. Right? This is a fundamentally utopian way of talking about things, but it sounds like normal and practical. And actually it turns out that, yeah, if you want to get rid of the coal industry, or if you want to get rid of oil and replace it with giant blenders that kill birds, it's going to come at some economic cost. That's just a fact. And this is the point that one of my favorite philosophers, Eric Vergelen, got to when he talked about how all of the progressive ideologies, fascism, socialism, communism, go down the list. They all try to create a kingdom of heaven on earth. They all try to immanentize the eschaton. Now, I bring up immanentizing the eschaton, first of all, because where other than here can I use the phrase, but also because when Bill Buckley ran for mayor of New York City, his supporters had buttons that read, "Don't immanentize the eschaton," and people wonder why he didn't win that race. But all immanentizing the eschaton means is trying to take what is reserved for the afterlife, trying to take what is reserved for the hereafter and bringing it down to the here and now, trying to make this a perfect world. As we know, as anybody, as someone who's worked on the victims of communism certainly knows, anytime you try to create a heaven on earth, you're more likely to take a shortcut to a hell on earth, because you're going to end up killing or smashing all of the square pegs that don't fit in your preconceived round holes. And this is what I'm talking about comfort with contradiction, is that a conservative and a libertarian understands that there is no way of making this a perfect world, and that's okay. The trick is to make this a good world and a good society. And that's one of the reasons why conservatives try to protect and conserve the founding principles of this country, because those principles have made us the most successful and wonderful country, literally, not figuratively the way Joe Biden means literally, have made us literally the greatest country in the history of the world. And that's worth protecting and defending. And so that sort of brings me very quickly to fusionism. Fusionism, which is sort of what the What is Conservatism essay is about, because that's what the What is Conservatism book is about, and it's largely what groups like ISI and National Review have always been about. Fusionism sounds like a really complicated subject, but it's not. It's actually very easy. All it is this principle, which still defines National Review, that in order to be a virtuous society, you have to be a free society, because virtue not freely chosen isn't virtuous, right? If I hold a gun to your head and tell you, you have to help this little old lady across the street with her groceries, you don't get any credit for helping the little old lady, and frankly, I don't get a lot of credit for holding a gun to your head, right? You have to choose to be virtuous for you to actually be virtuous. And this is the essence of fusionism. And it is also a great political principle for uniting the various branches on the right, because it takes in the sort of social conservatives, the religious conservatives, and marries them to the sort of liberty-loving, limited government conservatives. And as a political principle, I have absolutely no problem with it. It has served conservatism very well. I believe in it as a day-to-day sort of rule of thumb. But at the philosophical, fundamental level, it's deeply flawed, as I sort of point out in my essay. The reason it's deeply flawed is the whole part of the point of conserving traditional morality, Western civilization, ordered liberty, and all the rest is this fundamental understanding that a culture of liberty, first and foremost, is a culture. And you have to protect a culture. You have to defend a culture. I'm not going to get into all the immigration arguments and all the rest, but when you have right now a society that is openly hostile to elites and educational elites, they're openly hostile to Western civilization, openly hostile to the idea of assimilation, openly hostile to the very idea of that this country and this society did anything good in the last 200 years, what you really have is a war on our culture. And it's a very problematic thing. There are a lot of conservatives and libertarians who love to argue about economics as if they win the math argument, they win the argument. Remember last night Dennis Prager was talking about Jerry Brown and minimum wage, right? Jerry Brown conceded. He openly admitted it, that he loses on the math argument, right? That the minimum wage is in fact bad for the economy. It's in fact bad for low-wage workers because it creates a barrier to entry, because the actual minimum wage is zero. But it made him feel good. It makes his supporters feel good. It makes the union hacks who are using this as a way to rev up their contract negotiations. It makes them feel good. And conservatives who just want to say it's economically inefficient are going to lose that argument, because The other side is arguing about morality and playing on people's guilt complexes. And we're saying, oh, well, you know, it's really inefficient and it creates a barrier to entry to the labor market, and yada, yada, yada. You have to talk about how the minimum wage is immoral. It's fundamentally immoral. It locks poor, uneducated people out of the job market. The reason you have, the reason you have low wages at the bottom is because employers are taking risks on people that they might not otherwise want to hire. And if you tell them, oh no, you have to pay them, through the nose, they're not going to hire people, and that's immoral. And it locks the people who are most in need of getting on the ladder to economic success out of the labor market. And people who support a $15 minimum wage or a $20 minimum wage they may have good intentions, but they're supporting a fundamentally immoral position. And until conservatives and libertarians start making those arguments in those terms, we're going to keep losing. And this gets to sort of the broader problem with the fusionist thing. You know, my friend and colleague Charlie Cook at National Review, he's got one of these sorts of, he has a very libertarian position on everything like free speech and all the rest, and he says, there should be no closed questions, right? And we got into a big argument because he wanted to defend some Holocaust denier's right to speak on some college campus. And my view is, no, there are closed questions. Part of the whole point of conservatism is that there are some closed questions, right? For me, pedophilia is bad. We're done. We're not going to debate it. We're not going to consider it some sort of, oh, well, you make a good point, and here's my counter. But no, you're 100% wrong. I am 100% right. Done. Anyone who's dealt with their kids understands this. There's some questions that we're not going to debate, right? Pedophilia is one. Incest, it's another. Against it, right? I can come up with arguments against it, but that in and of itself is backsliding and a sign of failure, right? There is a role for taboo in society, and it's a very Hayekian case for it, right? The whole point of, one of the major points of Friedrich Hayek is that civilization is an emergent property, that through thousands of years of trial and error, we figure stuff out. And that's where morality comes from. And that there's more hidden knowledge in simple customs and institutions that we just simply take for granted than we could ever know. And so to say that everything should be revisited, everything is permitted until you can make a rational argument against it right now, is a recipe for unraveling big swaths of Western civilization. And I'm against it. The problem is that I haven't persuaded a lot of people. And so you have to have these arguments, and that's fine. And I just want to close. I only have like 90 seconds. That's about right? 1 minute? Okay. If you take the proposition, as I do, that ultimately culture of liberty is a culture, and it is about these things that we've acquired through trial and error over a very long time. I just want to close on this one brief moment, and I'm doing this as a National Review guy. There's a great threat that comes from Donald Trump and movements like Donald Trump. Because what Donald Trump represents is an effort to change the culture of conservatism to a kind of authoritarianism, unilateralism, big manism, right? It's inherently corrupting. I don't know if you guys have paid attention in the last, 6, 7 years, but we spent a lot of time talking about how single-payer health care is bad. I don't want you to, if you missed it, we did, okay? And that Obamacare is bad. It came up. And I'm just bringing this up as an example. A few months, over the summer, they asked Republicans whether they supported single-payer health care. 14% said yes. That's bad, but we can live with that, right? They were then told that Donald Trump is in favor of single-payer health care. The number went up to 44%. That is the power of cults of personality. And the culture that Donald Trump is bringing is antithetical to the conservatism and the libertarianism that I've dedicated my entire adult life to. The man never talks about liberty. The man never mentions the Constitution unless asked about it, and then he betrays the rich depth of his ignorance. He never talks about limited government. He talks about winning. And winning is defined as basically personally as however he comes out on top of any conflict. That is not what conservatism is about, but you can see, for good reasons and for bad, how it's changing the culture on the right. And I understand why the left has authoritarian tendencies, but I kind of thought that this debate was closed and settled on the right, that this was like pedophilia, one of these things that we just didn't debate anymore because everyone agreed dogmatically that authoritarianism, that one-man government, that constitutionalism, anti-constitutionalism, that these things were just stuff that we were not going to tolerate. And it's come in 6 months in a way that I never imagined it could. And that's one of the reasons why outfits like National Review, we are so fundamentally committed to stopping the guy, because we see it as not only bad for America, but antithetical to everything that we've been working on our entire life. So anyway, thank you all very much. It's lovely to be here. Sorry to leave on a downer.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Jonah. And as Jonah mentioned, we have a comfort with contradiction and a comfort with tension because conservatism is not an ideology. And so just like the authors from the 1950s, we have Doug Bandow to represent the case for the emphasis on freedom. So Doug, you want to come to the podium?
Actually, we'll just do it
Go do it
here.
from there? Perfect, okay.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here at ISI. I've always enjoyed working with ISI. I thank Chris and everyone else here for inviting me. I've always been struck by fusionism. Read Frank Meyer many years ago. And as somebody who is a political libertarian but whose personal views are basically as boringly traditional as imaginable, that I suspect I'm the only person at Cato who's known his pastor for 29 years. That I've been at 2 churches with my pastor, and I know that I've known them through 9 kids, and I spent Easter dinner with them. So, I mean, for me, the question of how you mix, very much a kind of a traditional sense of personal and social attitudes with a political libertarian view has mattered a lot to me. A quarter century ago, I wrote a book called Beyond Good Intentions, A Biblical View of Politics, essentially presenting a libertarian worldview to Christians and trying to square that circle. Needless to say, I didn't find a lot of disciples, but I did make the effort. I do think that if we're looking at the issue of fusionism today, there certainly are tensions there. And I think part of that are changes in the world over the last 40 or 50 years, which matter a lot in how we find a lot of within this broad movement of how people relate to one another. One of it is philosophical. I do think that there's been a change of a transcendent worldview that matters hugely. That, just as America's founding, I think we have to be very careful to talk about a Christian nation, but there certainly was a sense of a biblical worldview that even Thomas Jefferson had imbibed and represented. I think that, 60 years ago, we kind of a debate among, if you want to call them libertarians or the Trotteroff or whoever, and conservatives, everyone kind of came out of that and had a sense of looking at the world, an understanding of the moral makeup of human beings and whatnot, that really colored the way they reacted to one another. There was a moral understanding which everyone shared. And I think that made it easier then for the 2 strands of conservatism to kind of come together. There was kind of a philosophical moral bulwark there that for the most part everybody could repair to. I think today that is simply coming down. And I want to emphasize, I think it's coming down not just among political libertarians. I do a lot of Federalist Society talks. I very rarely find conservatives in Federalist societies who, for example, on gay marriage have a problem with gay marriage. I mean, this is a transformational change that over, say, the past 10 or 15 years that I think it afflicts far more than just political libertarians. Many of these are people who otherwise might be socially conservative, say on abortion, might be national security conservatives. Nevertheless, on issues like that, I mean, there's been this horrendous and huge shift that I think is something that affects a lot of conservatives. The second are the practical issues that 50 years ago, there were a lot of issues that really did unite libertarians and conservatives, one of which was the evil empire. That, for the most part, I worked for Ronald Reagan, that, libertarians had pretty much as bad a view of the Soviet Union as conservatives did. There were some arguments about exactly how to deal with it, but there really was a unifying sense there that this was an evil empire. It's gone. So the question of what America's role is in the world, I don't actually think we have to be the new empire. Suddenly you find this whole question of national security, where you come out in it, what are the threats, how do you deal with it, what's the impact of blowback, just has blown this issue apart in a way that once foreign policy, international issues united, I think today they divide. I think that the question of kind of the size of government itself, that to some degree it is a lot easier to have some of these battles when government didn't run everything. That because so much of the stuff would kind of just be out in private community. Who's in charge of moral education? How did, even public schools, I mean, you didn't have a lot of fights at one point over kind of moral education, sex education, a lot of these other issues, that suddenly all of these things have increasingly become politicized. And they suddenly bring in some of these issues of, well, what should the state do? Whose values did the state represent? That suddenly becomes much more complicated. I think that if we're looking towards the future, that statism still should unite us. That to me, statism is a huge threat for virtue and freedom. That both of these are under siege. And I think to me, Obamacare is the perfect example. My view is that, for example, that the contraception mandate, I just look at this and say, this is not a health care issue. It's not the sort of thing you normally would insure. I mean, you insure health, you insure against things, not things you choose. You insure against unexpected major catastrophes. That's not this. To my mind, the mandate is basically the use of the state to go after people you don't like. That from the standpoint of liberal activists, this is the moment, especially to get Catholics, anybody who's too stupid to understand, the issue of contraception. And I wrote a piece for Huffington Post on this issue. I got 1,000 comments. People weren't terribly happy about what I had to say, which is quite critical. But to me, what we see today is a state that is useful both very practically in doing bad things economically and other practical issues, but also philosophically. And it's an issue that I think must still bring libertarians and conservatives together. I think we're always going to have to then deal with these divisive issues and recognize that as a movement, there's a larger thing we are fighting, but recognize within that we will argue over national security. I mean, there are conservatives in this race I would never vote for because of my views of them on foreign policy. I view them extraordinarily dangerous. You want to shoot down Russian airplanes, do not ask me to vote for you. I think that is insane. Right? So, I mean, we're going to have some fights there, I think, on national security issues that are very important. We're going to have fights over the issue of using government for moral uplift. I tend to think that one of the reasons we're in this horrible problem in terms of gay marriage and trying to impose this on everyone is, look, conservatives were happy to use the state when they had the opportunity for moral uplift. Guess what? The other side now runs everything. So it's very hard when you've lost the philosophical argument. And I think the issue of the gay marriage issue is absolutely frightening in terms of the impact on religious liberty and associational freedom. That we're at a point where we actually go out there and expect people, you must affirm a procedure that you view as affirmatively immoral and against your historic. This is, in America, I find this astounding. Now, this is an issue, though, I do think that, again, libertarians and conservatives can come together on. Even my libertarian friends who are in favor of gay marriage recognize this is an outrage. And I think that we have to look for these issues, and this is one of those things that has to be kind of it's a very basic fundamental issue for anyone who is conservative or libertarian, is protecting these kinds of values. We're going to have arguments over individual versus communal in terms of at what point do you intervene, whether it be economically or other things, for the community versus individuals. And I worry a little bit about the closed questions. It was an interesting thing. I happen to think pedophilia is a closed question. The question is, do you try to shut people up? Because what's happening today is precisely this on gay marriage. It is a closed question, we are told. It's done. You cannot question it. The Supreme Court ruling on this was scary, where Justice Roberts pointed out that Justice Kennedy was kind enough to say you might teach against this, but he didn't talk about exercising your freedom when it came. So I think we want to be very careful then in terms of what we view as a closed question that cannot be questioned, even though we might view it as closed, and how we try to, again, have these protective freedoms in there, lest these issues be turned against us. I think we're entering very, very difficult times in the future. I think it's extraordinarily important to try to keep our strands together, acknowledging we are going to have some very profound differences. And I lived through these at Cato Institute. I do not write about gay marriage. Never. I'm pro-life. I do write about abortion. They live with that, even though I think most of the people at Cato probably are not my persuasion. I do, in fact, write pro-life. These are going to be tensions we're always going to be dealing with, and I hope in gatherings like this we can talk and try to keep this together, because we do have a huge enemy out there that threatens both virtue and freedom.
That deserves a round of applause, I think. you said it so well, Doug, I don't know what you've left for me to say. But will say something. Before I do that, I want to thank you, Chris, for the plug for our book, A Brief History of the Cold War, which Elizabeth, my daughter, and I co-wrote. And I'm happy to say that we are still talking. Which people might have thought might not be the case. So, differences and similarities between the traditional conservatives and libertarians. And I do agree with Doug that the primary similarity between traditionalists and libertarians is their opposition to our Leviathan government. It seems to me that Big Brother is not simply watching, he's squeezing the life out of us. And both traditionalists and libertarians cite the warnings in The Road to Serfdom by Hayek and other classical liberal texts that government direction leads to dictatorship. Both respect the U.S. Constitution, that is, the original version, as described by Ed Meese, Antonin Scalia, and others, as a primary document of the founding. Both libertarians and conservatives are admirers of the Declaration of Independence, although libertarians, I think, probably would wish that Jefferson, when listing unalienable rights, had written life, liberty, and property, and not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What about primary difference? I think the primary difference between traditionalists and libertarians is the role of government in a time of crisis, whether that's a military or an economic crisis. Most traditionalists, at least at the beginning, were for the Afghan and Iraq wars, though not for nation building in either. Almost libertarians oppose both wars, and indeed oppose all wars, including the war against drugs. Similarly, with regard to the Great Recession, most traditionalists reluctantly endorse TARP 1. Why? Believing that a failure to act by our government would have precipitated a global panic and a global depression. Most, if not all, libertarians felt that the banks and other financial institutions deserved to fail, and no resuscitation was called for. Doug has made reference, I think properly so, to this issue of gay marriage. And that, it seems to me, though, is not a primary but a secondary difference between traditionalists and libertarians, is their attitude about so-called social issues, primarily abortion and LGBT rights, with traditionalists insisting that the family is the essential building block of human civilization and must be given first place in society. And libertarians asserting A, that the woman is aborting a fetus and not a baby, and B, gays and their compatriots should be accorded the same rights as everyone else. I think where we come together is, as you say, where somehow these rights for gays and lesbians and the others should be given more importance, more standing than the rights of everyone else. With regard to the unity, and then Joshua talked a little about this, with regard to the unity between traditionalists and libertarians that Frank Meyer wrote about, well, first of all, the two sides were not as united as Frank suggested. There were some tensions all the time between the two sides. And the one guy who kept them together was, at least on National Review and therefore nationally in our movement, was Bill Buckley. He was a master fusionist. He was a master diplomat who would go to the libertarian, like Frank Meyer, and he would say, Frank, Russell Kirk doesn't hate you. He wants to work with you. Please, let's get together. And he would go to Russell, and he would say, Russell, go to Frank and say, Russell doesn't hate you. So back and forth, trying to get both of these guys to come down and work together, cooperate. But the solvent, the guy that made it work, was Buckley. Without him there, it would not have worked. And of course, the glue the cement, the salt, whatever you want to call it, that kept them together, libertarians and traditionalists, was a clear and present danger of Soviet communism. And that disappeared, and no equal threat has yet appeared, although we talk about Leviathan state, and I think in foreign policy, Doug, would you agree perhaps that if there was another 9/11 horror, that might help to bring together libertarians and traditionalists? Certainly, I believe there's a reason for the difficulty it is to bring together these two sides, and that is the absence of charismatic, principled leaders like Ronald Reagan and Bill Buckley, who made us see the error of our self-centered ways. So I think fusionism is possible. I think fusionism is here, but it takes a lot of work, particularly in the absence of that clear and present danger and the absence of the right kind of leadership. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jonah, Doug, and Lee. And when I was kind of preparing for this, I came across, we've got a wonderful library, and I'm blessed with a wonderful office full of great things, and I came across this September 24, 1960 edition of National Review magazine, and that was the first magazine, the first edition came out after the September 11, 1960 meeting at Bill Buckley's house in Sharon, Connecticut, where Stan Evans and leaders of the day, a lot of ISI students, and Lee Edwards was there, drafted the Sharon Statement. And as we read about, there's really, Bill Buckley himself said in the essay that you read, it's very difficult to define conservatism. But if there is a credo or a simple definition of conservatism, it really is the Sharon Statement. And Bill published the Sharon Statement and talked about the importance of young Americans for freedom in this copy. And here's what Bill said, which ties into what what Lee just said. And this again, September 24, 1960. In 10 years, much has happened. History proved the irrelevance of liberal doctrine. The critique of liberalism has been made, if not definitely, at least sufficiently. And it is a total critique. The word conservatism is accepted both by Russell Kirk and Frank Meyer as designating their distinct but complementary, even symbiotic positions. So on this issue of symbiosis, we have heard that there is some commonality in tying together what we heard last night from Dennis Prager. Jonah spoke eloquently on it, and also both Lee and Doug brought it up. This issue of transcendent truth, and one of the issues that brings that to light today is this issue of gay marriage. And so I guess, the question I would ask is, how do we, as conservatives and libertarians and fusionists, bring this question of the transcendent, this Judeo-Christian tradition, how do we do a better job of bringing that about and having that inform our political dialogue and discussion?
Going to me
here? Where would we like to start?
Let's see. The short answer is, I don't know. The slightly longer answer is, I think I'm sort of with Doug on this, is that when I hear the idea of the federal government trying to impose conceptions of the transcendent order on the citizenry, it makes me want to flip the safety on my rifle. And I think that, in part because I just don't trust the federal government to be able to do anything of the sort. The government, remember, as my old friend, late friend Andrew Breitbart used to say, politics is downstream of culture. And so much of what we need to do about restoring a respect for the transcendent order and all of that has to happen first at the educational level, at the cultural level, and then the government will be a lagging indicator of all that. I do want to say just very quickly, I think the way, I've done a lot of panels about libertarians and conservatives because I'm so cool. And almost invariably, we get into these big hammer and tongs fights between the conservatives and libertarians, and then some, propeller beanied intern with a Friedrich Hayek tie raises his hand and says, excuse me, sirs, Isn't it true that if we just went back to the federalist system enshrined in our Constitution that pushed most government decisions down to the most local level possible, wouldn't this solve all of your objections? And the libertarians and the conservatives, we sit there in silence for a second and say, yeah. Because, and this is the great compromise that satisfies the battles between libertarians and conservatives, is if you push everything down to the most local democratic level possible, you let the most people live the way they want to live. And one of those ways is conservatively, right? So that means in South Carolina, if they want to live, you have to protect basic civil rights, right? We fought a civil war, we amended the Constitution a couple times, so that's a closed question. Slavery can't come back. I'm not going to debate it. But beyond that, let people decide. And so on gay marriage, I have problems with gay marriage. I've sort of come around on gay marriage. I think marriage has much bigger problems than gay marriage. But if you push this down to the most local level possible, it lets more people live the way they want to live, and more importantly, or just as importantly, at least the winners have to look the losers in the eye the next day, right? At your kid's soccer game, at the supermarket, if you had a big local battle about one of these issues, whether it's gay marriage or something else, you have to live with the people you were fighting against. And that gives you a certain humility and appreciation for the other side and understanding that you live in a community. What I think unites conservatives and libertarians is the horror at this idea of one-size-fits-all government from Washington, where the government gets to impose values on 310, 320 million people in diverse communities. And that's what freaks out both conservatives and libertarians, because invariably in that kind of context, it's very unlikely that the value system that's going to be imposed from Washington is going to be our value system. Better to let people live the way they want to live in their own communities and have arguments. And if they lose those arguments and they're sad about it, well, I will break out my tiny violin and I'll give you one piece of advice. Move. There are places that will suit anybody's personality and tastes in this country. Move there and let people live the way they want to live.
Great, thanks, Jonah. Doug?
I don't see a political answer to the question of the transcendent. I mean, it was hard enough to try to get agreement in 1800. Trying to get agreement. We live in just a much more diverse society. A society, it's much less church, has a lot more people from different faiths, Hindu, Muslim, Baha'i, any number of others, and also a lot of people who, now proclaim themselves to be at least agnostics, if not atheists. So trying to get some kind of a universal understanding can be really rough. And look, I have this, when people bring this up, I always ask, well, so we want what, Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich and Denny Hastert to teach us morality. We want them running policy that's going to make America a more moral nation. Please forgive me, but no thank you. I always got frustrated with Republicans, they're on their second wife and they're lecturing me about, morality. It's like, wait a minute, stay married if you're going to start telling me this stuff. So I think we want to be real careful. And I even look at, I remember years ago a good friend who's very active, and all of you would recognize the name if I told you, who was very happy in the Reagan years they were going to have a vote on school prayer. And I went up to this person who's not particularly faithful religiously, and I said, well, you don't really want this, come on. And he said, oh no, but it'll be great because it'll get the evangelicals all upset and they'll go out and vote. Right? Very practical minded. I understand that as a political opportunist, but I was horrified as an evangelical myself. It's like, all of my friends in church are being manipulated by somebody like you. So I'm going to be real careful with that. And the second thing is, who's going to win? My fear is, the problem is we've lost this battle. Part of it because it's not just a political battle, it's a judicial battle. And the courts have, completely gone the other side. So that, trying to win this back, the transcendent politically, I think is extraordinarily difficult. I feel, again, the issue, for example, of what do you do on gay marriage, I don't think that's going to turn around. It struck me there's a generational shift there that is absolutely huge. That I think the way to win that at this point is to say, leave us alone. Look, if somebody doesn't want to bake a cake for a gay wedding, leave them alone. There are plenty of bakers. There are plenty of photographers. This is conscripting people. So we've got to kind of shift the battleground some and recognize, look, I think I do think there are cultural aspects of the cultural war we can win. I think abortion is one of them. Libertarians have always been divided on this. There's always been a very active Libertarians for Life, long led actually by an atheist woman. It's very, very interesting, Doris Gordon. You know, my view is simply, look, I mean, it's human life. And look, I tell people they don't like it, but other than rape, if you choose to have sex, you know babies can show up, right? And if a baby shows up, maybe you have some responsibility. We can argue about what it is, and I mean, Trump jumped into this kind of, typically, you know, kind of, how do you penalize? But it strikes me, these are the kinds of issues where I think we have a chance that we can talk about, not so much as just purely Judeo-Christian, but this is a broader sense of human life. Do you respect human life, dignity? You know, where do rights come from? You have to be alive to have rights. I mean, I tell libertarians, it's kind of hard to have rights if you're dead. So I think there are some of these issues we can fight. I think we have to fight at the cultural level. I think the churches have to be involved. This is where, I don't want churches telling me how to vote. I want them to make the moral argument about what animates the society, what's the moral foundation of a good life. You know, that sort of thing. It's a very tough fight. It's scary.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Lee?
I just think we have to take the long view. Some things, some issues cannot be solved here and now. In point of fact, public opinion is shifting more and more towards a pro-life, anti-abortion point of view. All the polls show that out. And part of that is because we realize that it could not be an easy fix through a human life amendment, which is what we thought 20, 30 years ago. We realized we had to go about it a much more of a long range and a harder way. And that was to work at the local level, work at the state level, work at a federalist level, and so forth. Not try to have some magic solution from the top. So we're winning. Now that may take another, who knows how many more years and how many more lives will be lost as a result of that, but to take the long view. With regard to gay rights and gay marriage and so forth, well, it just seems to me two things. Number one, that yes, they should have certain rights, but their rights should not be given priority over the rights of everyone else. It just seems to me to be a very commonsensical way. And with regard to gay and lesbian and all the other kinds of rights like that, well, once the birth rate has dropped down to 0, it might be that people will be able to take a little better attitude about it. And when that happens, HTSL rights will come more to the fore. Those are heterosexual rights.
Great, thank you. Well, Lee, you mentioned the long view, and whenever there's internal conflict at ISI between me and the ISI team, I always tell them we're going to take the long view. But Lee, you mentioned the family is the essential building block of society, and Doug has mentioned the individual as the essential building block of society. So maybe we could tease that out a little bit. We've got we've talked about all the various strains of conservatism, and we have the Burkean conservatives and the crunchy cons, and we hear a lot about the importance of the family and neighborhoods and the whole sense of subsidiarity. But some conservatives taking it to a new level. They want to kind of check out and have their little Tolkienian shires or what have you. So maybe if you could just talk a little bit, what is the essential building block of society? How, we believe in rights are given by God, I think, to individuals, but what is the role of the little platoons? And I'd love to get everyone's take on some of these things.
When I got this question from you, Chris, it was about, does any collective unit of society, the family, the neighborhood, the church, the little platoon, the mediating institution of Tocqueville, have rights, or are natural rights bestowed by God merely upon individuals? Whoa, boy. So I began reading my Plato, I began looking at Aristotle, began looking at Augustine, began looking at Aquinas, and I gave up. I'm not a political philosopher, I'm just a poor, ordinary, broken down historian. And that's a marvelous question, which I think really ought to be taken up by Liberty Fund, the colloquium. But let me just offer a couple of thoughts, and maybe this is simplistic. And since a conservative unit of society, like the family or the neighborhood, is made up of individuals, it has many, if not most, of the natural rights bestowed by God on individuals. And they include a respect for the other person, the golden rule, a belief in a supreme being as the dispenser of rights, an agreement that reason must govern emotion. And I have to go to Russell Kirk, who wrote this in talking about Edmund Burke. Society indeed is a contract. It's a partnership. But it's not a mere commercial concern to ensure private profit, nor yet expressed in the general will of Rousseau. Indeed, men do have rights by virtue of their human nature, but these rights are not bloodless abstractions, nor are they limited to mere guarantees against government. To narrow natural rights to such neat slogans as liberty, equality, fraternity, or life, liberty, property, was to ignore the complexity of public affairs and to leave out of consideration most moral relationships. And one of the most important of the rights which men possess in society is the right to be restrained from actions which will destroy their neighbors and themselves. The right to have some control put upon their impulses and their appetites. And it seems to me that in this passage we can see suggestions of both a traditional conservative and libertarian viewpoint. I don't know if that's going to be of any helpful to you philosophers out there and in this panel, but that's my contribution.
Well, thanks for doing your homework, Lee. Doug, do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah. I think that when we think about rights, that there are communal institutions are extraordinarily important. I mean, individuals exist only in community with one another. I mean, you know, every libertarian I know grew up in a family. I mean, every libertarian I know, most of them have families. They do not run their families by libertarian principles, economic principles. You know, they don't send their 2-year-old out to earn enough money to eat at night. I mean, they treat their 2-year-olds like every conservative I know treats their 2-year-olds. So it strikes me that the challenge is, I mean, when we talk about communal rights, it suddenly sounds to me very lefty. Right? I mean, suddenly we've gone from negative to positive, and suddenly now it's the oh my goodness, you know, stick in your favorite ethnic group. You know, are you an authentic representative of whatever the group is, and the group suddenly has rights? And you know, things we've done, for example, say with Native Americans, where you can take kids back who've been adopted. And I mean, you've created these kind of extraordinary things where some kind of community that in some sense doesn't even really exist, but is able to exert itself. So my view is that in terms of rights, you know, the only person who will stand in moral judgment before God is an individual. You know, I mean, I think of the great scene of the sheep and goats. I mean, there's nobody. There's not a communal sense. I mean, it's what did you do to help those? What did you do to help those who are in need? That doesn't mean these communities aren't critically important. And indeed, you may very well be judged how you treated that community. I mean, especially I think the family. I mean, the family is extraordinarily important. So I think that the role of community and communal institutions is very important. And at the very least, government should do no harm. That, to me, that's a very obvious principle to start out, that you don't intrude. I mean, it's certainly an understanding of subsidiarity with Catholic thought. I mean, the Puritans talked about different levels of government. Their view church was a government. I mean, they saw different institutions that had very different roles. The civil government should not be out there mucking around, especially federal. I mean, the notion that the national government decides who gets to use bathrooms. I mean, I have no answer to the issue of transgendered. I cannot imagine the pain people go through who want to do this. So my view is you have to treat this with utter humility and compassion. But the notion that the federal government wants to decide I mean, it's going to tell, 12-year-old schoolgirls that they have to go to the, I mean, this is monstrous. So this strikes me, this is something it's not so much a right of the community, but there's a role for the community that is being violated, and that the government should not violate that indeed, that there are responsibilities there. And I do think that the family is unique because of the role of children, that you're dealing with, and I think there's an argument for encouraging that institution. We can argue about exactly what that should be and how easy it is, I think, for government to turn encouragement into discouragement. But I think that we're dealing with a fundamental building block of society there. So I wouldn't say that does the family have rights? I feel very uncomfortable with that, but it has an extraordinarily important role that we should be very, very careful before we start mucking around with and trying to engineer and transform, especially after it's been created, it's thousands of years old and we suddenly have a new conception here. We want to be very careful.
Yeah. Thanks, Doug. Jonah, any thoughts on this?
I'm sympathetic. At the same time, I think the circle can be squared by simply saying that we have individual rights as parents to raise our children, and as we see fit within broad guidelines. You know, you don't have a right to mutilate your children. But beyond that kind of thing, you know, it's the left that has, you know, seriously, one of the creepiest sentences in American political life was from Hillary Clinton, who said, we as a country need to move beyond the idea there's any such thing as somebody else's child. And I think that sentence alone is the justification for the Second Amendment. The great story about this was Phil Graham, when he was saying how he was asked by someone, you know, what the essence of his educational program is, and he says, the first assumption of my educational program is that I love my kids more than you do. And this woman says, no, that's not true. I love your children every bit as much as you do. And Phil Graham shot back, oh yeah? What are their names? And so I think, you know, and Doug's not going to like this bit, but my view of libertarianism has always been that it is the single greatest political philosophy for maximizing human happiness. It only has two vulnerabilities, two things where it's iffy on: children and foreign policy. And if there were no children and there was no need for foreign policy, it is outrageous and ridiculous not to be a libertarian. But children and foreign policy bring up arguments about the role of the state and the role of families and the role of society. And I think, I get where Doug's coming from on this, and I guess I don't believe in family rights either, but I do think that we have inherent personal rights to raise our children the way that we think is best for them, so long as we don't do something hideously evil.
Great. Wow. Well, we've
Chris, let me just add,
yeah,
if I may, just
please,
one
yeah.
more thing, come back. Again, quoting Edmund Burke, the true compact of society is eternal. It joins the dead, the living, and the unborn. And we all participate in this spiritual and social partnership because it is ordained by God. Burke reminded the Englishmen of his time of the essential rights of love of neighbor and a sense of duty. And I think those are still essential today.
Great. Thanks. Well, you know, let's just give a hand to the panel.